Chapter 2. Life had become one slow, irritating grind by mid-March. Biology was still giving Melody fits, and if she pulled a D in math, she might have to throw a party to celebrate. Who she would even invite at this point was a mystery, considering the only people she ever saw were her family, co-workers, and the other students who were struggling almost as much as she was. Still, passing math had to be worth something. It was math that she was feverishly working on as she drove maniacally through the early evening Houston traffic 3 days before spring break. Equations, formulas, 2 plus 17x, who cared? Certainly not her. She stuck the pencil in her mouth as she turned a corner. "No," she muttered through the pencil as her gaze swept across the parking lot that was jammed with cars. "Oh, come on, I'm not that late." She maneuvered the car around first one line and then a second. A frustrated growl crawled into her throat. "I should have left before Farron got there. She does this to me every single time." Her hands worked the steering wheel back out onto the busy street. The library was a hike and a half, but it was her only good option. Watching for even a single small break in the traffic, she sat in the turning lane, her left foot tapping in consternation on the floorboard. "Are you kidding me?" she asked when no opening appeared. "Come on!" Finally, a hole the size of a pin opened, and Melody careened through it. On the other side, when she realized she hadn't been pulverized by the oncoming pickup, she breathed a short sigh of relief. There were 3 parking places left at the far end of the lot. As soon as the car stopped, she threw it into park, yanked her book and papers off of the seat, and grabbed her backpack without bothering to actually put the book into it. Her feet beat a quick path across the parking lot and back to the jam-packed street. Yanking her courage to her, she dashed between the oncoming traffic, barely making it to the center of the street without getting hit. Would a crossover be too much to ask? She asked no one in particular. A tiny break, and she ran for it again. Heaving from the exertion, not to mention the fright, she pulled her books up tighter and hurried past the cars lining the parking lot. School was hard enough. It really shouldn't be life-threatening to get there, she thought as she pulled her backpack up on her shoulder. When she pulled the door open to the admin building, a gust of frigid air hit her smack in the face and whisked through the bundle of stringy blonde hair clamped carelessly at the top of her head. "Welcome to Alaska." Pushing her feet forward, she trudged to the bottom of the first of 3 flights of stairs. One more tug to keep her backpack on her shoulder, and she started up. Just across the hall, Blaine was having his own problems. The carefully constructed project he had finished at 2 the morning before hadn't fared very well on his walk to the admin building. With each step, tiny pieces of architecture were slowly ungluing themselves. He had just set the project on the little bench so he could retrieve the 4th plastic window that had made a suicide dive when he glanced up and saw her. The recognition hit him square, and for a solid second, he froze. Melody. At least, he thought it was Melody. Her hair was wrapped on the top of her head and stuck out at weird angles in all directions. She looked tired, like she'd been up studying all night. He shook his head and breathed a small laugh as she disappeared up the stairs above him. Her and every other poor unfortunate human being within these walls. With that thought, he stuck the window back in place on the miniature condominium and pressed extra hard for good measure. Then, carefully, he picked up the project. As he started up the stairs adjacent, but opposite the one she had just ascended, he wondered to himself what she was doing here. Going to school, obviously, but he couldn't remember ever seeing her around before. Not that he was all that social himself. Scooting in under the wire and jumping up to leave as soon as the professor said, "That's it," he wasn't exactly the type to stand around chit-chatting and getting to know everyone. On each level that he climbed, he wondered if she had stopped there. Reality was she could be in any one of these classrooms, taking just about anything. The admin building was home to everything except the administration. They had bailed long before Blaine started what seemed eons ago. 2 years, this associate degree was supposed to take 2 little years, and yet he had somehow managed to stretch that out to almost 5. After next semester, he would have to decide on a next step. For now, the next step was somehow getting through modern architecture. When class broke 3 hours later, Blaine hauled himself out of the seat and smoothed the wrinkles out of his brush-polished gray slacks. His foot screamed in pain as he put his weight on it again. The outside of his shoe felt like a solid block of wood against the blister he knew was there without even seeing it. He kicked his heel back against the riser, trying to get the shoe to give his foot just a little more room. "Hey, Blaine. Good project," Lana McAllister said from behind him. "Great lines." "Oh, thanks." He swung his backpack to his shoulder and stepped aside to let Lana out in front of him. "Yours was good, too." At floor level, her soft blonde hair swung gently over her shoulder as she looked back at him, waiting just a beat for him to catch up. "You going out of town for spring break?" "Oh, you know," he said with a shrug. "A bunch of us will probably go down to Corpus or something." "Corpus?" she asked in clear horror. "One of the guys has a beach house down there," Blaine said, falling easily into the made-up world he inhabited on occasions like this. He shrugged. "I wanted Florida, but the guys couldn't afford it." "Oh," she nodded in understanding. "Well, Corpus won't be so bad." "Yeah, that's what I keep telling myself," he said as they reached the stairs and started down. The second Melody caught sight of Blaine rounding the railing of the second staircase opposite from the one her foot had just reached, her heart stopped, and she almost pitched headlong down the next flight. Soft blue-gray pinstriped shirt, perfectly pressed gray slacks, the bright satin blue tie just a fuzz of a shade darker than the shirt. She knew it was him. It had to be. No one else had that silhouette. That unbelievably handsome silhouette that she had fallen so in love with as she lay as motionless as possible on the seat beside him all the way home from the amusement park. She had never been sicker in her life, and yet he never flinched. Even when she threw up all over the beautiful soft beige leather of his car seats, he just kept looking at her with that, "I really wish I could do something to help you" look. If it had been her, she would have thrown the other person out. And yet he had stopped and helped her clean as much of it off of her as she could, then got her a bag and a Sprite. Her own mother couldn't have cared as much. All the way home, she had laid on that seat, and every time her eyes unglued themselves from her bottom lashes, she was grateful for that silhouette. Careful to stay out of his sight now, she followed him down. He was talking to Miss Perfection number 2. That figured. Wavy blonde hair, the kind that looks like silk. She had a slender to the point of non-existent body, perfect shoulders, perfect waist, perfect outfit. Perfect, perfect, perfect. It was sickening. Melody yanked her backpack up against her neck and tried to look somewhere else. Blaine was a nice guy, not to even mention rich and handsome. A prize catch in any girl's book. Melody knew better than anyone else what that meant. Nice, rich, handsome guys weren't exactly lined up at her doorstep. In fact, besides AJ and Bobby, she'd never even been out on a real date, and she wondered now if those two even counted. By the time she reached the bottom step, he was gone, lost in the throng of students hurriedly leaving the halls of higher education. Oh well, it was a nice thought, but even if she got up the nerve to talk to him, what would she say? He would be nice. She would fumble around trying to figure out something to say that didn't sound hopelessly stupid, and then he would be gone. Yes, she knew this routine, and for his sake, she hoped they wouldn't have to stumble through it again. Lillian crawled slowly up the little driveway. Her tires crunched on the small stones. She rolled to a stop, and Blaine cut the headlights. Night had fallen across Houston long before. With the practice of 100,000 times, he cranked down the window and reached to the door handle outside. A little persuasion and the door popped open. He quickly rolled the window back up and grabbed his backpack. Somewhere down the block he heard the slamming of a door and indiscriminate yelling. Ah, another night in the throes of ghetto land. Trying not to listen to the sounds that disgusted him, he climbed the 3 steps to his own kitchen door. Once again, he vowed it was only a matter of time before he got out of this place. No one deserved to live like this, and he was determined to get Dylan out of here at the first chance he got. However, he'd been promising himself that for 10 years. and the fact that it still hadn't happened yanked a sigh out of his soul. The screen door squeaked in protest as he pulled on the little handle. He popped the second door loose from its frame and shook his head. Why didn't his mother get it that leaving the doors unlocked was dangerous in any neighborhood? In this one, it was suicide. With a quick turn, he locked that door and sighed when the blinking of the television lights flashed across the threadbare curtain that shaded nothing. He strode into the living room, glanced at the couch where his mother lay. The empty bottle of vodka lay on the floor next to her, making the entire room reek. Do it, he told himself as he turned the knob to shut the television off. Just do it, and don't think about it. He swiped the vodka bottle off the floor and kicked the chip bag in front of him to the garbage. Then he went back and checked the front door, which was unlocked as well. His spirit registered his irritation, although outwardly he simply went through the motions he had long ago memorized. Down the darkened hallway he padded until he got to the first room, where he cracked the door and peeked in. As always, the sight brought a soft, sad smile to his face. Even in the midst of chaos and insanity, the little angel boy could look like peace itself. As he did every night of his life, Blaine stood there and breathed a promise to that sleeping figure. I'm going to get you out of here, Dylan, I swear. Then, softly, he closed the door and went back out to the kitchen to start his fourth shift of the day. By Wednesday of spring break, Blaine knew he had to do something about his shoes. The hole that had started between the sole and the upper was ripping wider by the minute, and his toes felt like chopped spaghetti by noon every day. During his lunch break that afternoon, he had casually sauntered by the shoe department of Harmon's and glanced at the tags. He wasn't obvious enough to attract Kenneth's attention, which was good because even with his employee discount, there was no way he would ever be able to afford the shoes laid out for the masses. A thought crossed his mind, but he quickly batted that away. She would think he was stalking her if he showed up at Galaxy Shoes again. But then again, she might not even be working tonight. It was a good possibility that she went off somewhere on vacation. It wasn't like he knew her schedule or anything. So, as he woofed his half of a tuna sandwich down in the break room, he decided that after work, he would make a short pit stop just to see what kind of a selection they had. Melody didn't see him come in later that afternoon. She was elbow-deep in boxes and shoes from the last customer who had tried on every single pair of size 10s in the store and then decided he didn't like any of them. That was a great way to kill a commission check, she thought, as she stuffed the last pair of shoes back in the box and stood to start the arduous task of putting them all back. "Excuse me," the soft voice said behind her. I was wondering." She whirled around, and the middle of her heart collapsed around the sight. "Blaine?" He smiled as though at a joke only he knew. "I thought that might be you." Whipping her hair over her ear, she bent down for 2 of the boxes. Yeah, who else would it be drowning in shoe boxes? He laughed and then glanced back at the shelves. "Hey, I was wondering if you knew why there were no size 10s anywhere." With a laugh, she held up the 2 boxes in her hands. "Because they're all right here waiting to be put back up." "Oh, well, how convenient." Blaine glanced down at the boxes in her hands and then all the way to those stacked at her feet. "You mind if I try on a few before you put them back? It would sure save me some time." She shrugged. "They're all yours." He sat down on the little stool and then looked back up at her skeptically. "Oh," she said, sensing his discomfort. "I'll just be over here if you need anything." "I'll remember that," he said with a smooth smile. He brushed the white and peach striped tie down as he reached for the first box. With a nod, she drifted out of sight, but furtively kept her attention on him as he went about choosing a pair of shoes. There was just no other way to say it. He was gorgeous. He had traded in the blue shirt for a light peach number that brought out the lighter highlights in his brown hair. Too bad she didn't know he was coming in. She would have taken a little extra time to put herself together this morning. She pulled her fingers through her past shoulder-length hair and flipped it over her shoulder, and then yanked at the awful dull purple Galaxy Shoes polo she was forced to wear. After nearly 9 hours, she was quite sure she looked atrocious, which, of course, was about the way things always went. Blaine was careful to tuck his old shoes in the crease behind the stool in case she came back. Truthfully, he hadn't wanted her to leave, but when he realized she might actually see how bad his shoes looked, he was glad she had. However, when he'd narrowed the choice to 3 pairs, he really needed a better opinion than his own. He looked around the store and noticed her straightening a wall of socks just beyond the shelving. "Melody," he called, and she turned. He loved the brightness of her eyes and her smile. "Did you make a decision?" Leaving the socks piled 6 high, she strode over to him. Her periwinkle galaxy shoes knit shirt brought out the blue of her eyes. Periwinkle, he thought with a thwack. Only guys who worked in the clothing industry knew there was such a thing. Still, he liked what it did for her eyes. He shook his head in frustration as he held his hands out from his sides to examine the shiny black shoes currently in residence on his feet. "I was hoping you were better at this than I am." She laughed as she came all the way over to him. "Hey, they're your shoes." Spinning the toe of his shoe so it picked up his heel, he twisted to the side to look in the little floor mirror. "I know, I just have a hard time telling how they look. You mind?" "Hey, what's a salesgirl for?" Sitting down on the stool he had vacated, she crossed her legs before crossing her hands on her knees. "Let's see the options." "Well, there's this one." He handed her 1 pair. "It's nice looking, but I'm not sure I like the stitching along the side." She took the shoe from him and pulled the tongue up. "Man-made upper. It'll fall apart in a week." "Ah, bad choice." He took the shoe from her and stuffed it back in its box. "How about this one?" Carefully, she examined the next choice. "Leather, that's good. Yeah, that one would work." "And this one?" he asked, slipping the one on his right foot off and handing it to her, wishing he didn't notice how nice it was to be so close to her, or how horrible his feet smelled from being on them all day. His heart was pounding in his ears so loud he was sure she could hear it too. She examined the shoe carefully and then handed it back. "That one will work too." He wished it was easier to not notice how relaxed and normal she was. For some unknown reason, he liked that about her. She was just Melody, not Melody trying to be fabulous. It was a nice change from the girls he was normally around. Great. He looked at the 2 shoes now in his hands. Both were deep brown, and, but for the different stitching, there really wasn't much difference. "Why don't you try them on? Maybe we can eliminate one that way." Figuring it was worth a try, he bent and put the first shoe back on. "Now walk," she commanded. He looked at her in surprise. "Where?" "Anywhere. Around the shelves, up and down the aisle. Just walk." Slowly, feeling her gaze going with him, he walked around the shelves. "How do they feel?" "A little tight," he admitted. "Tight is not good." Blaine bounced twice on the toes. "Won't they stretch out?" "Better to get one that fits right out of the box. Here, try this one." He swapped the shoes out and then stood to try them out. "Better?" she asked. "Still tight," he said, shaking his head. "Okay, then why don't we try a 10.5? "But I wear a 10. "Just for the funny of it, let's try one." He shrugged and sat down on the bench she had vacated to remove the shoes. When she returned with a bigger shoe, he slipped them on his feet, and instantly his little toe said, "Ah." "Better?" she asked. He tested them out on the floor. "Much." "Walk." Dutifully he stood and walked around the shelves again, even bouncing in the shoes a little when his feet felt the newfound freedom. "Wow, these are much better." "How do you like the style?" He looked down and nodded, but then thought better of giving his own opinion. Back on her side of the shelves, he turned slightly. "What do you think?" She folded her arms as she scrutinized his feet. "It's a good color. It'll go with anything. I think it's good." Then she seemed to catch herself. "But it doesn't really matter what I think." Trying not to be obvious, Blaine glanced at the box, but she caught just enough of his gaze to understand. "They're originally $60, but they're on clearance for $45. He was genuinely touched, although she had no idea how much that comment helped. and she was just doing her job. Gratefully, he smiled at her. Then I'll take them. Cool, she said, as though she hadn't expected to make the sale. I can take them to the front for you if you'd like. Oh, he glanced back at the pair in the crease behind the chair. I think I'll wear them, if you don't mind. Let me see the two right quick. He handed them to her, not really understanding. Quickly, she checked under the tongue of each. It's a pair, she handed them back. I'll just meet you up front. Be there in a second. As soon as she was gone, he gathered up his old shoes and stuffed them into the box, carefully covering them with a tissue paper. Then he glanced around to make sure he wasn't leaving anything behind. The area was stacked with boxes, just like he found it. His gaze caught the size 10 stamped on the side of one of the boxes. No wonder the other ones had never felt quite right. With a shrug, he started to the front. Melody had just reached the counter when Farron Gerald, the manager on duty, slipped up beside her. Ooh, who's the dish? Dish? Melody asked as she began typing in her code. The guy, Farron said as she smoothed out the non-existent wrinkles at the stomach of her orange stretch shirt that was living up to its name. He is unbelievable. Barely glancing up, Melody caught Farron's meaning. Oh, Blaine? He's just a friend of mine. A good 6 inches shorter than Melody, who wasn't exactly tall, Farron had a flitty fairy quality to her that annoyed Melody to no end. So you know him then? Farron asked. Yeah, why? Melody asked, but didn't bother to get the answer because Blaine picked that moment to approach the counter. She smiled at him. Not the fake smile she usually used, but a real smile that reached her toes with its happiness. Farron was right. He was gorgeous. Out of her league, but gorgeous nonetheless. Thankful that Farron had vacated the front of the store, Melody finished punching in her code. Would you like some socks to go with that today? He glanced at the display. No, I think I'm good there. Okay, phone number? Just then, Farron reappeared at her elbow. Melody, you have a phone call. Melody turned in surprise. A call? She never got calls. In the back. I'm sorry, it sounded important, Farron said. Oh, well, Melody glanced at Blaine. It's okay. I'll handle this one. Farron smiled at Blaine sweetly. She took hold of Melody and pulled her from the computer. Don't worry, you'll get the commission. Oh, okay. Melody backed to the end of the counter. I guess I'll see you later, Blaine. He smiled. Yeah, later. Seeing no other option, she turned and headed for the back. The petite raven-headed girl stepped into Melody's spot. Phone number? Blaine's attention stayed with Melody a second more as she disappeared through the shelves of shoes. Hello, Earth to Blaine, the girl said, and he shook himself out of the trance. Oh, 555-4357. And how do you want to pay for this? He pulled out his checkbook, scribbled the numbers down, and signed it. Handing it over to her, he glanced back to where Melody had gone, absurdly hoping she would make it back before he had to leave. So, Blaine Donovan, the girl said, surveying the check, you got a place to wear those nice new shoes? A place? Work? He picked up the box and slid it under his arm. Farron laughed as she punched in his information. No, I didn't mean work. I meant, well, I was just thinking, some of us are going out Friday night, end of spring break kind of thing. You wouldn't be interested, would you? Blaine's attention crashed from the back to the checkout counter. Oh, I don't... Ah, come on, Farron said with a quick wink. You know what they say, all work and no play makes Blaine a dull boy. What do you say? I can call you tomorrow night with the details. But you don't... Then he caught sight of the computer and understood all too well. Oh, sure. I guess so. Cool, she said happily. Oh, I'm Farron, by the way. He took the hand she offered and tried to smile. Only then did he realize how beautiful she really was. A great offer from a beautiful girl. Where was his head? Charm machine on. Well, hello, Farron. It's nice to meet you. I'm... Blaine, she said with a coy laugh. I know. His smile said it all. By the time Melody returned to the front, Blaine was gone. There was no one on the phone, Farron, she said, more than mildly annoyed. Oh, really? Farron asked, as though she was concerned by that. I guess it wasn't as important as they thought it was. Guess not, Melody said, still not happy. Linda called while I was back there, though. She was wondering if you got that shipment of aerosols this morning. Okay, I'll be sure to give her a call in a few, Farron said, and rechecked the counter. Can you handle everything out here? Considering there wasn't another customer in the whole store, that answer was pretty easy. Sure, no problem. In a way, Blaine never expected to hear from Farron again, but in another, he wasn't all that surprised when the phone rang the next evening. Hey, Blaine, what are you up to? Sweet. She sounded so very sweet. He repositioned the phone at his ear as his gaze shifted to the open architecture book across the room on the table. Just hanging out. How about you? Putting together our little outing for tomorrow night. You still going to be able to make it? What time did you say again? We'll probably meet at the bar Houston around 10. Don't want to get there too early, you know. Oh, of course not. Who else is coming? Not that he would know any of the others, but just in case. Everybody's not nailed down yet, but probably Ben and Karen, and maybe Ty and Dalise. I thought I'd call Eddie and Kyla too, but whoever knows with those two. Oh yeah, he said, suddenly realizing this sounded like the loading of the Ark. You know, Blaine, Farron said his name slowly and with emphasis. I was also wondering, not that you have to or anything, but, well, my car's in the shop. I'm sure it's out of your way and all, but... His head clicked on what she was saying. Oh, I could pick you up if you want. Could you? That would really be so great, because I hate sitting on that console in Karen's car. I'll be at work until 9. Why don't you just swing by there? Sounds good. He made 3 quick mental notes to himself at the same time. Babysitter, Peyton, no overtime for tomorrow. I spoke to Mrs. Sanchez today, Melody's mother said as she sat in the living room watching the mouse race across the virtual track on the television the next afternoon. Oh yeah, she said, not really hearing the other end of the conversation. You'll never guess who's back in town. Who? Big dramatic pause that Melody didn't even hear. Bobby Wilson. That's nice. Nice? Did you hear what I said? Bobby Wilson is back in town, her mother repeated. And Vera said he's back to stay this time. Got a job over in the paint store down on 157th. I think he's going to be the manager or something. That's nice, Melody said again as she continued to roll the mouse ball around the screen. Whatever happened with you and him anyway? Her mother asked as she sat down in the faded brown chair to watch her daughter. Me and Bobby? Yeah. Melody shrugged. I don't know. I guess we just went in different directions. That, and she caught him with Roxy Gallegos, but that was more information than her mother needed to know. He was always such a nice boy, so polite, and now that he's got his education behind him? Melody sighed as the mouse ball veered 1 second too long on the round bridge and plunged to his death in the ether below. Bobby's not my type. What, not your type? He's a nice guy with a steady job and a paycheck. How is that not your type? Trust me, Mom, he's not. Melody switched off the game box and pulled herself up from the floor. I think I'm going to call it a night. Rather than stay down here and talk to me. Rather than stay down here and let you fix me up. Melody smiled in spite of herself. She couldn't be too mad. She'd fixed too many people up in her time to get angry. I just want you to be happy, her mother said, pouting. I am happy, Mom. Me, myself, and I. We are very happy. But you're 26 years old. Shouldn't you be out at least looking? Good night, Mom, she called as she mounted the stairs. You could do worse, her mother called. Worse than Bobby Wilson? That would be a stretch. This has been For Real, Book 3, The Courage Series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.